Good evening and welcome to the Cabinet meeting of the 11th of July. Welcome to colleagues online and those in the room. Want to welcome Ornella, who's with us for the next 2 weeks on work experience, something we as a Labour and Cooperative Administration take seriously. So it's great to welcome everybody here today. We've got apologies for absence from Tracy Coombs, and Adam Price will be with us shortly. I'm going to move to item 2, which is a record of decisions. Hopefully colleagues will agree with me signing the record of decisions. However, I do want to pick up on page 11 of this agenda, the item around the Homes Infrastructure Fund. We've received information in the last 36 hours from DLUC that they will not be supporting the £170 million scheme moving forward. That is deeply disappointing, not for us particularly as an administration or us as a council, but the residents of Medway. And I emphasise the word Medway. That infrastructure is not just for one village or one community, that's for all of us collectively. And we're serious about delivering that local plan. We will do it come any challenge that puts in our way. But the decision that's been taken is incredibly disappointing and actually I think makes that even more challenging than it was, say, 36 hours ago. The other thing I'd want to say publicly, and colleagues may wish to comment on this before we move on to the substantive agenda, is any elected representative, whether they're a councillor or an MP, who welcomes losing £170 million from Medway, needs to think again about the job they're in. Really distasteful language. We as an administration are deeply disappointed. We want that infrastructure to come here. We know that there are lots of residents who already feel that there are houses without the infrastructure in place today, let alone any future housing that may be built. So we will continue the dialogue with Homes England and DLUC. It's particularly disappointing that we've written both to Rachel Maclean, Minister for Housing, and indeed the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, who last week at LGA conference was waxing lyrical about getting houses built. But his department's decision for the people of Medway leave a long way before that reality happens here. So I'm not sure if any colleagues wish to comment on that. Of course, it is breaking news. I'll take Teresa and then Lauren, Nashaba and Simon. Teresa, please.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. And I think it's really important that we take the opportunity at Cabinet to allow people who might be watching and other people who might hear, because we've just seen some social media from the MP for Rochester and Strood welcoming the news that that money has been taken from Medway by the government. Now, we're still optimistic that Michael Gove might change his mind, and we're going to make contact with him again one last time. We listened very carefully to what he had to say at the local government conference last week, and actually what he had to say was some very positive things about local government, some very positive things about what he wanted to achieve in terms of infrastructure and new homes associated with that. And so today, I am genuinely surprised to see that one of our MPs has chosen to welcome the fact that that 170 million has been taken from Medway. It really is, as you said at the last meeting, Tristan, when we didn't know if it was actually going to happen, a mortal blow. And it's important to be on the record to say that Labour in Medway have always welcomed the Housing Infrastructure Fund. We said we would never say no to money for Medway when we were in opposition, and every time there was an opportunity during the consultation to comment on the plans and how things were going, we put in, through our representatives, Simon Curry, a detailed response and published those responses. So our hands are clean. We wanted that money. We wanted infrastructure. And now, I'm afraid, Kelly Tolhurst and other people have put us in a position where we have to argue with predatory developers about what people in the peninsula particularly are going to get. Because at the moment, the answer is nothing very much.
Thank you very much. Lauren?
Yeah, just to put on record my shock that a Conservative local MP is welcoming the removal of funding for Medway to the tune of £170 million from a Conservative government. I mean, that's just unbelievable. And we all know that there is a presumption in the national planning laws around development. And what this means, it doesn't mean that it's going to stop the housing. It means that the houses are going to be delivered probably without the infrastructure to support it. So without the better roads, without a public transport network. And it's a very short-sighted decision, and it's shocking that it's being welcomed by our Conservative MP. And the people who are going to lose are the people who live on the peninsula, who are going to lose out in the quality of their lives and the quality of their communities. And at least, as Teresa said, we know that we as an administration in Labour have done everything that we can to secure that money. Just a few weeks ago, I was at a regional economic forum, the Kent and Medway Economic Partnership, getting the support of other councils across Kent, including KCC, getting businesses who sit on those boards to write a letter to the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, to give us their support, because they understood, as we do, that it makes absolutely no sense to be delivering houses without the infrastructure to support it. And it's shocking that it's not being listened to, that we're not being listened to, and that the Tory MP is welcoming this, because, as I said, it's the people, the residents in who are going to lose out.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Nashaba?
Thank you. To echo what has been said by colleagues, obviously this is really, really disappointing in terms of the news that we will lose out on this money. And we've discussed this in previous cabinet meetings, but it is a real risk factor for us across Medway to not be able to have access to the funding. And I think it's a sign of a government that has lost sight and strategy of what it's trying to do. So on one hand, it is asking for housing delivery, which we recognise has some challenges with it, but also recognise the need to build houses and for people to have safe and secure homes and affordable homes. So we see all of that. But then to say that you're not going to get the necessary infrastructure that needs to go with it. And let's be honest, the HIF funding was only going to go part way to delivering the infrastructure that we needed. Actually, the investment we need to match the level of housings we are being asked to deliver is far greater. So to then take that funding away, it puts us in a really, really challenging situation. And I think it is irresponsible of the MP to speak out at this point in the way that she has, Kelly Tolhurst, in terms of the position she set, given that it was a Conservative council that got us into this position in the first place by failing to deliver a local plan, a Conservative government that has now withdrawn this funding without thinking carefully through the longer term impacts, and the fact that on one hand they're asking us to deliver housing, and on the other hand they are asking and withdrawing the funding for the infrastructure that needs to go with that. And now we have the Conservative MP for Rochester and Strood who has come out and welcomed such a decision, which means that we'll lose £170 million that would have helped to improve the lives of people in Medway. I think that's a really shocking thing for her to say, and I think she should really reflect on it, because it's incredibly short-sighted, and in the longer term it's going to have a really negative impact on our ability to deliver across Medway and to make the right decisions for residents here. It's absolutely right that we get the right type of housing, that we do build houses across Medway. However, we all recognise, and this is something that residents have said time and time and time again, it has to also come with the necessary infrastructure. This decision means that we'll get the housing, we won't get the necessary infrastructure potentially.
Exactly right. Thank you. Simon?
Thank you very much, Vincent. I won't sort of go over too much of the ground that my colleagues have spoken about. I'm equally very disappointed by this decision and by the reaction from the local MP out there to somehow think it's a good thing to lose all this money. I mean, the consequences are, just from our environmental agenda alone, the fact that we will lose money for the Cockenwood community project, the woodland project out there. We lose funding for the rewilding project that was going to take place out there, and we lose funding for the sustainable transport network, which was going to serve the whole of the peninsula. That money's gone now, and we're going to have to find it from somewhere else if we're going to deliver. We're determined to do that. I'll put that out now. We are determined to get these projects through somehow, but at the moment that money has gone, and those communities out there are worse off for this decision, and even worse off for their own MPs thinking it's a good idea. It's crazy. And I just want to emphasise again the point that's been made, that part of the reason for this decision, apparently by DLUC and Homes England, is the fact that we didn't have a local plan. And that's a failure of the previous administration over years and years and years of not delivering a new local plan. We will get one in place in the next 2 years, come hell or high water, basically, as Vince has just said. So I just want to make those points. It's a failure on the part of the previous administration and a failure by our current government, supported by the local MP as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Harinder?
Thank you. Just to add on that, it's just for those watching and thinking that this is something only to do with housing and this is just to do with the peninsula, and we've got to be very clear that this actually affects budgets across the board for everyone in Medway. And what I mean by that is for every £1 that we lose, for all that £170 million that we've lost for infrastructure there, that's now going to have to be found elsewhere across budgets right across Medway. So it affects every single person, it affects every single person in Medway and every single budget line from all our services. So we have to be absolutely clear that this is not just a housing issue. And so the comments made by the Member of Parliament for Rushes and Strood, when contrasted against that, they're beyond naive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harinder. Tristan?
Thank you very much, Vince. I too am really disappointed about the loss of £170 million. I think it must be the only MP in the country to celebrate losing such a significant sum for their communities. And remember, this is extra transport investment for buses, extra provision for cycling, as well as parks that were provided for the location, and significant work that's already been undertaken by our own councillors and by council teams as well. So this is a deep disappointment. And I also have to say, on record, actually, that we haven't actually got a judgment yet. So she has preempted a conversation that we were to have going forward. In my view, prejudiced the outcome of that decision. And the question is what does she want to deliver for the peninsula? And I genuinely want to ask her for this, because she sat in this council as a Conservative councillor and delivered more housing over her tenure. The infrastructure didn't go in when she was councillor and a cabinet member on this in a previous administration. What does she want to deliver for that community? Because the young people, young families in Medway are needing homes for the future. We have an increasing demand. We have businesses that are interested in that who now might be not interested in investing in our area. So does she actually want to change our community for the better? Does she want to invest in sustainable building practice and improvements? Or is she just holding and clasping on in the eventuality she might persuade people that she's some sort of NIMBYist and their friend? Because she has got no consistent track record on this. She has been back and forth, and I have to say, she is the only MP that I've come across who actually supports the removal of millions of pounds of investment. And I think she must look at herself in the mirror, and I have to say, what is she good for? And next year, the electorate will make that judgment, and I think they're going to make it harsh. Thank you.
Thank you, Tris. Just to round this up, I'm conscious this is agreeing the last set of minutes, which we will do. But I want to thank all of my colleagues for their comments. I agree with every single one. I want to thank hard-working council officers who in the last 3 or 4 weeks on this issue have worked above and beyond. As Lauren said, I want to thank all of our partners, including Roger Goff. We may have not agreed on other things recently, but on this we absolutely did. I thank him for his support. I thank other council leaders who have given personal support, and a number of organisations, including the business community. For all of that to be ignored is bad enough. For the elected representatives of Medway, democratically elected by the public just a few short weeks ago, to not even be given an audience by the Secretary of State, it is pretty disrespectful, not to us, but to the public of Medway, and to any elected representative. We've talked a lot about our MP, rightfully so. That's the voice for Rochester and Strood in Parliament, but there are also a number of councillors who have explicitly lobbied the Secretary of State to not give Medway £170 million, including Conservative councillors and all independent councillors. I say shame on every single one of those people who will be somehow celebrating that our communities across Medway, as Harinder said, the financial impacts here are not just purely about the roads, the green spaces, the infrastructure. It's what we then don't do as a result of having to do some of that stuff because we're statutorily obliged and we now don't have that resource. So I thank colleagues for their comments. We'll move on to the substantive business of the Cabinet tonight. And that actually takes me to the first substantive item, which is on a more positive note, perhaps, than the one we've struck already. So we were elected 48 days ago by the annual council of Medway to be their administration. I will come to DPIs in a moment, but I want to move on to this issue first. This is important. So the cost of living plan is something which we have given national commitments to our party leader. We know it's important. We know it's the right thing to do. We have had conversations with partners and others on the issue of this particular item. We know that families are struggling like they've never struggled before. And one thing I say, and I said this morning to Anna Cookson on BBC Radio Kent, if you're someone who is struggling, if your family is in a point where you're finding it really difficult to make ends meet, reach out to the website, reach out to the organisations that are listed here on the technology that we've got in the plan that we're moving formally tonight. We know that's an easy thing for us to say, and it's more difficult, particularly for those who are perhaps working full-time, occasionally in more than one job. But this is a crisis we haven't seen this like for some time. And actually, it's been compounded, particularly for those who actually own their own home. And we're seeing interest rates going up a huge amount. And we know the reasons for that. We won't rehearse those issues here. So the plan we're bringing forward tonight is something that was referenced in the LGA conference last week by the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. And actually, it brings forward something which is important. It brings all of the issues and solutions that this council has. Some which were in place because of the previous administration. I'm not going to be churlish to say everything in this plan has been created in the last 48 days. It would be naive to say otherwise. But there is more coming forward. And again, in particular, you'll see the recommendations to do two things. One is around investing in a really important piece of technology to signpost people in an advanced way to make sure people are finding it easier to apply for the support they may need, and indeed reaching out to organisations they may not know are there. And the second piece, and I think this is, we talk often about spend to save. This is spend to invest in the people of Medway. So we're spending around £40,000 on a bit of technology which will get to a point where more than £200,000 is in pockets of families of Medway residents who are struggling at the moment. So that's the kind of real difference this administration will make. There's a lot of detail in there. Again, I'm grateful for officers who have worked hard on this. We were clear we wanted it to come forward within the first 100 days. It's day 48, and therefore we're ahead of schedule. Long may that continue. So hopefully colleagues will support me in moving the recommendations from 8.1 to 8.3. And again, I'd urge all residents to take a look at this. We'll be communicating it in a number of ways. After the school holidays, we'll be going into every book bag in Medway. Really important way to get to those families directly and using some of those new techniques and technologies we've got to get the communication out there. I'll pause and see if colleagues have got any comments. Yeah, I'll take Nashaba, then Teresa.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I really welcome that this has been brought forward at this stage. I think it's going to make a significant difference at a really difficult time to many of our communities. As a Gillingham council, I've seen firsthand the impact that the cost of living crisis is having, particularly in area, for residents in Gillingham, and the opportunity to at least try and find a way to get some better support, I think, would be very, very welcome by a number of people that I've spoken to, both on the doorstep and those that are approach me as a councillor as well. So I just wanted to have that put on the record that I think this is very welcome. I also have fears that the cost of living crisis is going to get worse as we go forward, particularly this year with a potential increase in interest rates in the autumn. So being prepared and ready for that is something that as a council we should take seriously. So very pleased that as part of the Labour administration that we have put this and brought this to a cabinet meeting so early on.
Thank you, Nashaba. Teresa.
Yeah, thank you, Vince, and thank you, Nashaba, and thank you from me to the officers, especially for bringing forward some innovation here with the use of some new digital technology that is really accessible and that families from any part of Medway can use, because actually this is a crisis which is now affecting people of lots of different incomes and lots of different kinds of property ownership, and especially those who are in the private rental sector whose landlords are passing on the rises in mortgage to them. So we've got to be mindful and cognizant of the fact that lots of people are affected by this. And I don't want anybody watching or anybody who hears about this to feel ashamed or feel that they can't step forward. We want as many people as possible to take advantage of the help that is there, to do so on their own behalf by engaging with the technology. And I want to pay special tribute, actually, to everybody in the voluntary sector who have been really helpful to us in terms of being able to offer not just advice and support, but actual practical help and solutions, because the voluntary sector, as well as everybody else, are suffering with rising rent costs and rising costs and having to tackle things on their own behalf as voluntary and community sector businesses in the same way that everybody is. So this is a fund for everybody, and we want to make sure that everybody takes advantage of it. We'll be monitoring it, we'll be working with communications to make sure that people know about it, and we'll be offering the hand of support to anybody who feels that they need it.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Anybody else on that item? I mean, I think it's clear, as Nashaba rightfully says, regrettably, I wish we didn't have to bring this forward. And again, we can rehearse the reasons as to how we've got to some of these points elsewhere. The final thing I'd say before putting this to the vote formally is obviously other support may come along. So we're very clear that at the point that we're sat here today on the 11th of July, this is the plan. Other things may come forward from voluntary sector partners, from government, from best practice elsewhere in local government. So the plan will continue to respond as we need to. And as we said already, if you haven't looked at the website, do have a look at it, medway.gov.uk/household help. And the wider communication piece will continue after we formally propose and move this, which we'll do now. I'm formally moving 8.1 to 8.3. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I will go back to agenda item 3. I was so eager to get the cost of living plan agreed that I missed an agenda item. This is declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other significant interests. Are there any interests? Tristan.
Yes, thank you very much. I have, as a landlord, I have interest in specifically the item around selective licensing, so I will be withdrawing from that item.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Great, okay, let's move on to next item of substantive business. Adam, over to you for the Medway Youth Justice Plan.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Councillor Maple. This report is to do with the Medway Youth Justice Plan 2023 to 2024. We are, under the Crime and Disorder Act 1998, this requires local authorities to have a youth justice plan, which is updated annually in order to set out how youth justice will be delivered within available resources. This plan, which is attached at Appendix 1, is a completely new plan in line with the guidance distributed to local authorities in March of this year. The format of the plan follows guidance and headings provided by the National Youth Justice Board. This report was considered by the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Committee in their first meeting of this cycle since the May elections, and their comments are set out in Section 6 of the report. A diversity impact assessment, DIA, has also been carried out and is attached at Appendix 3. The 4 priorities are laid out in pages 41 to 44 of Medway's Youth Justice Plan for this current year. They are, first of all, to support young people to realise a positive identity, strengthen and build bonds, bridges and links between young people and the community. The second priority is to work with young people and partners to create a safer community for the whole of Medway. Third priority is to keep young people safe and enable them to thrive Fourth priority of this plan is to prevent young people from entering the youth justice system in the first place. So I attended this morning's meeting of the Medway Youth Justice Board, and the themes in this year's work plan will be, first of all, disproportionality and prevention and diversion. So each of their board meetings is going to have a theme, and that's the first one in October. The second one will be around serious violence, exploitation and victims, because we know that young people are as much victims as being involved in the other end. Then the third theme for this current year will be custody and remands, and also like resettlement. And the fourth one will be partnership and resources. So this is a big change moving forward. It's no longer the Medway yacht, bringing forward what they're going to be doing. It actually comes from all of the partners. So there's NHS, there's the police, local authorities, and obviously there's the link through to central government. What I do recommend is that during the iteration for next year's plan, and I've said this before, it hasn't been held for a number of years, but I would strongly recommend that there be a workshop with all our new members and returning members and the professionals working in Medway's youth justice area, because I think that will be very popular and will really get the Medway element coming through in the iteration of next year's plan. So I know there's probably other members that want to speak on this, so I'll give notice that after those points and questions that I will be commending Medway's Youth Justice Plan 2023/2024 to this Cabinet and to seek your approval.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions, comments? Tristan, please.
Thank you very much, Vince, and thank you very much, Councillor Price, for the report, and I'd be happy to support that. It's really important, this giving every child the best opportunity to achieve their potential in life is an absolute key priority for Medway Council. It is a child-friendly council, and we are seeking to ensure that all our residents are aware of that. We know that if we are to create the environment that enables our children and young people to flourish, we must deal with all of the wider societal issues that can impact their well-being. And tonight there are a number of other issues on the agenda around housing, environment and other aspects which all link together to improving outcomes for our young people. It's noted that this Youth Justice Partnership Plan sets out our ambition to move upstream and brings together all available resources to support children, young people and families that come into contact with our services. And there have been significant challenges over the last 10 years. And I, in opposition, amongst others, have highlighted the privatisation of the probation service, our concerns around that, some of the funding streams that have come through to our previous youth offending team, and the impacts around changes to the legislative environment, which has seen a decline in number of people going through our youth services, youth offending services. And there have been some legislative reasons for that. It is of note, however, in recent years budgets have changed, and this vision is one of prevention and protecting the public, which is absolutely correct. And as has been said, I'm hopeful that we will work collaboratively as a system to engage earlier and support our young people to reduce the risks and likelihood of them becoming involved in the criminal justice system. And we have seen successes there, and that must continue. For those who unfortunately do commit crimes, we do have to, however, develop bespoke solutions tailored to their needs, and I'm confident with this new approach, working across agencies, that we can do that. And this will enable them to make different choices and ultimately not reoffend, which will be the evidence base that we will look through. I believe this justice plan is really ambitious. It is young person centred, most importantly, and driven by evidence. And key to the delivery of this plan is the strength of our local partnerships which we developed and the quality of the services that we commission and provide. And ultimately in this building, and I want to celebrate some of the work, we have some of the best people and services to support young people in the country within this local authority, and I believe that we are ready to set that forward. And I'm going to commend all partners and officers for this report, and let's get this in motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Lauren?
Thank you. So I obviously support the plan. I think it's a really good piece of work. I did just want to put on record my disappointment, though, that the national template does not consider the experiences of girls and young women in the youth justice system. And I understand that's not our fault, that a lot of work is happening in that area in the council, which is really great to hear, but that at the national level, that focus is not there. When I look at the report, it says that the analysis of the information identifies good performance and can provide focus on regional and national themes, and it's incredibly disappointing that women and girls' experiences are not being captured in that thematic review. And I think it's a perfect example of how a lot of policy in this country sadly does not reflect the experiences of women and girls. The paper is quite clear, as you've said tonight, Adam, that previously to 2022, we were able to locally determine what the headings were, and it's very disappointing that we've now lost that ability. If we retained it, we would be able to cover that, or at the very least, the national template should be allowing for it. And, you know, when you look at the experiences of women and girls in the justice system, huge numbers of them have sexual abuse histories, have rape histories, domestic violence, and they are needing support. A lot of their criminal offending is in relation to trauma, and they need greater support from us, and it's very disturbing that their voices are not being captured in a national template like this. And I would just ask that the portfolio holder consider potentially writing to the National Youth Justice Board to point this out. I think as a local council we have a voice, and we should be using it to hold the national government to account and the national bodies to account, and suggesting where we think that they are failing. And I think this is one of those instances, and we'll just welcome Councillor Price if you consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. If there's nobody else, before I go back to Adam, I mean, I certainly agree with everything that both Tristan and particularly Lauren has said. That's been an area which there's been strong focus in Medway, including, actually, to be fair to the police, at points they've stepped up where they've needed to, and the fact that we can't recognise that, I think, needs to be highlighted nationally. So I think that's certainly something we can take offline and make sure that that correspondence is made. I'd also say that I think the comments from Overview and Scrutiny were very helpful. I think it was a good conversation. I tuned into that online, and it was a good conversation. So I certainly look forward to debating this at full council when it gets there, but very supportive of the two recommendations. Back to you, Adam.
Yes, thank you very much, and also can I particularly welcome Councillor Lauren Edwards' contribution on this. We were obliged to follow the national template. Yes, I do welcome Councillor Lauren Edwards' contribution about the need to reflect the position for women and girls within this annual plan. That's not to say that there won't be work going on for them. It's just that it doesn't form actually part of that template which we've had to write the plan around. But I know, particularly within the Medway Labour and that cooperative group, previous councillors prior to the elections of this year were actually using some of their ward improvement funds money towards having high street surgeries really geared towards our women and girls, to be able to for them to be able to have advantage of various devices that can help to give them confidence as they go about their lives within our community. So yes, I think that is a shortcoming, and I think it is a disadvantage, obviously, by actually having a national template. You can't always reflect everything, but I think that is such a big gap that I would welcome your urge to me to write to the National Youth Justice Board, and I certainly will be doing. So yes, that's subject to those provisos. I would commend this year's reports, because obviously this does need to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are those two recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Next item, the Better Care Fund. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you, Vince. And I want to do a bit of context setting and make some comments about this before I get into the detail of the plan. So people will see from the report, the Better Care Fund was created in 2015. It's an ambitious programme that spans the NHS and local government, and very welcome, and has grown in importance since the inception of the Integrated Care Board, because the agenda for partnership working and collaboration is being pushed very hard, and there's cross-party agreement that in this particular area of work it's a good thing to do. It's worth £36 million, which sounds like an enormous amount of money, but I'm afraid we need every penny of it, and we're still carrying, even with this type of investment, a £7 million overspend in adult social care, which shows you the depth of it. But for all that, I want to put on record particular thanks to officers, especially the partnership commissioning team, a relatively small team whose work's absolutely crucial to ensuring that we can meet the government's expectations under the Section 75 agreement. There's a complex web of contracts sitting under this, commissioned from our local voluntary and community sector and others. That sector itself has experienced great challenge with a shortage of volunteers since COVID, rising costs due to inflation. So putting a plan together has to take account of the risks involved and the resilience of the sector. And so it's a resource-hungry activity to meet the metrics that the government lay out, a complicated set of metrics that then have to be monitored. I also want to thank the Health and Adults Overview and Scrutiny Committee for their helpful and relevant comments, as well as legitimate concerns that some members there expressed. In particular for their commitment to wanting to ensure, as I do, absolutely, that Medway receives a fair proportion of the available funding through the Integrated Care Board that's sufficient to cover our needs compared to other areas in Kent. And I'm clear, for the avoidance of doubt, that we need a proportion of resource that reflects the needs of our community and the terrible health inequalities that we've been carrying for the last 9 years with hardly any movement. So I will continue to be a champion of that. I'm on the record at the ICB and other meetings for insisting that that's the case. I'm not moving on it. We need more money, the more affluent areas with better results in health inequalities in order to meet the demands of this plan and indeed wider plans from coming forward from the ICB. And I'm really interested as well to be a champion for unpaid carers who help us save money. I've embarked on a round of visits to carers groups. I'll be going to see Who Cares, for example, this Friday out on the peninsula. I want to hear directly from people how these funds are helping them with the challenges that they face in saving all of us money, lovingly and willingly looking after members of their family. And that, to me, is a very important part of this. You can see that at Section 2.4, the Better Care Fund contributes to a whole series of things: wellbeing navigation, integrated community equipment services, reablement services, home care and residential placements, carer services and respite, infrastructure to support the voluntary and community sector, community nursing, mental health peer support, dementia support, a huge raft of things that are really focused on keeping people living a good and healthy life for as long as possible and maintaining their independence, even when something happens to them, when an illness accelerates or when an accident happens. And remember, this is about the whole community. It's not just about older people. They are a very large proportion of the work that this does, but this is about people with lifelong disabilities, lifelong learning difficulties, who need our support. And it's really important to remember that. A particular interest of mine is assistive technology. That is, technology that can be used in the home to help people stay more independent for longer. And there have been huge advances in that lately. So together with the senior staff here and external partners, I've embarked on a round of meetings and bringing people together to make sure that our workforce understands what assistive technology is, has got access to actually making recommendations about it, feel confident about it, and always mindful that assistive technology in the home can't replace the friendly face of someone who's looking after you, but it can increase people's independence and prevent them from getting ill. So you'll all see over the next few months, we'll be having some training sessions for staff, we'll be working with external experts. I hope that we'll be working with Kindy, our company as well, to make sure that this is provided, and reviewing some of the assistive technology that people commonly use now, such as pendants that are worn so that someone can press for help when something happens. The idea of this technology is that we don't wait until an accident happens. We put a big focus on trying to prevent accidents happening and a big focus on trying to keep people more independent. So it's an exciting development. I was very pleased last Friday to talk to the Health and Wellbeing Board, to all of our partners, about our plans for this, because the NHS has got a part to play in using technology as well, because we want more people to be able to monitor their own health, to understand how to use things like a blood pressure monitor, diabetes monitoring equipment, lung function monitoring equipment, taking their own temperature at home to make sure they keep well. And so all of our partners need to be involved in this. It's an exciting development, and I'm pleased to say as well, last night we were working with the Chief Information Officer at the Council, thinking about digitalisation and considering, well, how are all of the plans for using assistive technology going to work in with those kinds of things. The other thing that I wanted to say, if people are wondering, why is there still, with all this going on, a huge amount of effort going into trying to reduce the number of external placements in adult social care? Why have we still got an overspend? The reason we've still got an overspend is actually because £15 million was taken out under the austerity regime. So it's not very surprising to me, on a rising curve of demand, that these problems exist. We've got to rise to the challenge, and for a narrative that's developing across the media and in other places too, that somehow social care is broken, we can't meet our statutory commitments. I say to anybody who is listening to that narrative, I won't let that happen. And I'm not just on my own and with the Cabinet not letting that happen. There's a huge raft of people behind me working in the Council every day to prevent that happening, and working with our partners to prevent that happening. As a mandatory part of the Better Care Fund, we have to do a fair cost of care exercise. And I can say today, we are not paying any provider up to the fair cost of care. Fair cost of care has been identified. We haven't got the money from the government to pay for the fair cost of care that they commissioned and said that we had to have. And I would also point out that smaller local providers are much better at accepting that than big companies who've got a hedge fund sitting behind them making demands on trying to take money out of statutory services. They are the ones who are putting the greatest pressure on. They're the ones who are less able to join with us and understand. And for that reason, coming later in the year will be our new bold plans to take on some of this ourselves, to invest in social care once and for all, and to put ourselves in a strong position where we're not prey to the market. But for those people working with us, those people giving us an understanding of the situation that the austerity regime from the government has placed us in, I do thank them. And we will continue to work in any way we can, including through a modernisation agenda, to make sure that we get absolutely the best value. And very close monitoring is going on of the way that the Better Care Fund is spent. So our accountability is high, our determination is solid, and for anybody who wants to ask a question, my determination to make sure that the Integrated Care Board gives Medway the resource that we deserve is absolutely there.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Any questions or comments on that? I mean, one thing I'd say before moving the formal recommendations, we had last night the One Medway Charter signing, and quite often people will go, why are you doing that sort of thing? What is that all about? Actually, that's about, in this case, 8 of our organisations, and more will come in the future, who are working together already, but sending a clear collective message to say, we will work collaboratively, and actually the Better Care Fund is a real and tangible example of that right now. So I thank those partners who joined with us yesterday, really critically important. As I say, more will follow. Similar to the last report, I'd also want to place on record my thanks to Overview and Scrutiny, who looked at this, and again, helpful commentary from them. So very happy to support this. Back to you, Teresa, for any final comments before we move to the vote.
No further comments if nobody else has.
Great, thank you. All those in favour of those recommendations, please. Yeah, agreed. Thank you. That's then move us on to Nashaba for the next item.
Thank you very much, Vince, and really pleased to bring this item forward. As we talked about earlier, the cost of living...
Just have to pause while Tristan leaves. It was so good, we'll hear that sentence again.
Can I continue now? Oh, no, not quite.
Wait for him to leave the room, technically. You're not getting a cup of coffee on your way. Back to you, Nishab.
So I'm doubly pleased to bring this item forward today. As we discussed earlier in the agenda when we discussed the cost of living plan, this was something that was part of our manifesto commitments, and it comes in recognition, both of selective licensing and additional licensing schemes, around some of the challenges that we currently face in the private rented sector. I do want to put on the record before we talk a little bit more in detail is just that we do recognise as an administration that there are some challenges within the private rented sector for landlords, and we do recognise that it is a bit of a challenging market. I think a lot of that is to do with some of the issues we've discussed around the rises in interest rates and mortgages. So whilst we do want to keep good landlords within the market, we do recognise the need for a healthy private rented sector that is meeting needs, and we want to continue to enable that locally as a Labour administration and as a council. We also do recognise that there are some challenges within by certain landlords and in certain properties that when we are looking at standards, and this is really what this item is about. So it is two schemes, which is selective licensing, which will essentially look at areas of high deprivation where there might be challenges within the private rented sector market around the conditions of housing and how we can look to improve that. And the other, which is additional licensing, and that will seek to look at some of the licensing around HMOs, which we also recognise there are several of across Medway. Just for clarity, the report that is in front of you today is to set the parameters for what those two schemes could potentially look like in Medway. It is not the details of what the final schemes will be. It enables us as a council to undertake the scoping that is required to set the parameters, understand the needs, and whether those two licensing schemes are the right fit for some of the challenges that we face across Medway. So I just want to have that put on the record. At 4.12 and 4.13 for taking the feasibility studies forward, we have set out what the budget demands will be and also how that will be paid for. So again, under 4.12, that is going to be funded through an underspend in the flexible use of capital receipts. Really happy to take any questions that people may have on this, but I think this is a really positive step forward, and I think it looks to address some of those challenges that we see in the private rented sector, and I think it gives us an opportunity to start to unpick some of the challenges some of our residents are facing. So very proud that this has come forward at this cabinet meeting and starts that conversation for a wider scope of work.
Thank you very much indeed. Simon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vincent. A huge thank you to Nishaba for bringing this forward, because it's such a massively important issue. Members will know that my own ward is Luton. There are a lot of issues around deprivation and the quality and standard of housing, and there is no doubt that we do have some good landlords in Medway, but we also have landlords who've neglected their properties and neglected the people who live there for a long period of time, and this is going to be helping to address that issue. It's so important for our communities, something that we've been working very hard on for a number of years in many respects. So a big thank you to the officer team for bringing this forward as well. And I think also, let's not forget that this is also about investment in Medway, investment in our future, investment in our children, and investment in our properties as well. All those benefits are going to spin out from this proposal. So I strongly support it, and I thank Shaba for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any other colleague? Before I go back to Nishaba, similar situation. I've had 16 years of emails from people living in substandard accommodation, and officers here working with one hand tied behind the back, because actually what they have to work with at the moment is quite limited policies. This is changing that, and you're absolutely right. There are some really good private sector landlords who occasionally have bad tenants, and we need to work through the landlord forum to deal with that as well. But actually, I don't get many emails about that. I get lots of emails about this, as I know many other colleagues do as well. So the fact that, again, in less than 50 days, this Labour administration and your leadership as our housing spokes, housing portfolio holder, I will get the language right eventually, it shows to me how seriously we take this. And we know there are residents who will be looking on tonight who have been asking for this council to do this for some time, and it's now happening. Back to you, Nishaba.
Thank you, colleagues, for your support on this, and just to reflect that the work that officers have put into bringing this forward has been brilliant, and that I would like that to be on the record, that they've turned this around very quickly, and recognise that this is a good thing to do. So thank you for their hard work, and also to Simon, who did start to look at a pilot scheme when we weren't in administration, but were actually in opposition, and that was then by a different cabinet of a different colour refused. So it's brilliant to be able to bring this forward today with hopefully the opportunity to take it forward.
Thank you very much. Are those recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can someone let Tristan Osborne know he's allowed back in? And he can have a cup of coffee. I'm in a generous mood tonight, despite the first 20 minutes of this meeting. Tristan, I said you can have a cup of coffee. If you can grab it. There we go. That's efficiency, moving straight on. Let's move to the next agenda item then, which is agenda item 8. Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you very much for considering this item this evening. To start off with, to say this is actually a joint collaborative effort. We have a collaborative cabinet and a collaborative council. So Tristan and I have worked on this together. So I'll thank him, and I'm sure he's going to have a few words to say about this item as well. This is about three things, effectively. It's about, and it continues our theme for tonight, despite the frustrations over here to start with. Our theme tonight is about community engagement and community improvement and bringing people together. And this is another element of that process, if you like. It's about air quality. It's about road safety for children and adults, the parents as well. And it's also about healthier lifestyles involving more walking and cycling. So all those elements are coming together within the context of this scheme, which is basically to make it easier and safer and healthier for children to get to school. And I think that's probably, I'll stop there for the moment. I'll close up and I'll pass over to Tris, who's a few things he can say on this as well.
Tristan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Maple, and thank you to Simon. I just want to thank the team in Frontline Services, Ruth DeLu, and all of the other officers for all of their hard work on over many months, actually, on this proposal. It's one we inherited from the prior administration in terms of an approach, but we have taken it and engaged with it, and I think sensibly so. So just to educate people, once again, the School Streets Initiative is intended to provide safe spaces for school children and their families to travel to and from school. It is designed to improve air quality and encourage residents to use sustainable transport, including getting kids to cycle and walk as well. Okay, it is in terms of the what it is, and I think there has been some miscommunication out there. So just wish to clarify, it is a temporary vehicle restriction at a school drop-off and pick-up time. So there is no other times of the day where these restrictions will take place. And the initiative is designed to improve the air quality and road safety around schools. So one of the things which has been picked up during the election and actually by correspondence to many councillors is just how unsafe people feel, not only residents, but actually people dropping kids off at school around that school drop-off and some of the behaviours that have been observed there. So we've been working collaboratively with schools and the governing bodies in those schools and others to develop this response. And we held an initial informal public consultation, and we have received a significant number of responses. Over 1,482 people have responded across the 11 initial proposals. And we have listened, actually, to what people have had to say. And we intend to bring forward 6 proposals at St Mary's Catholic School, St Peter's, Mears Court, Burnt Oak, St Thomas More, Greenvale. Okay, but we've also acknowledged that there have been some mixed reports and consultation outcomes at others, including Phoenix Primary School and St William of Perth. Okay, so we have been listening and working a collaborative approach with the community. There has been some miscommunication, so I just want to be absolutely clear that people who work in schools as teachers, teaching assistants, or other members of staff will be entitled to access their place of work. That is absolutely critical, and I know that the trade unions and others have made voice to that concern, and we're happy to clarify people who work in those streets as well will be able to get access, and clearly residents as well will have permits as well. So just want to make that clear, because I know there has been some communication in other places around that lack of clarity. And this is fully funded through the £500,000 through the Active Travel Fund. And it is our intention, if this is successful, to roll this out across other schools in the area. And indeed, we've had interest from other primary schools in having one in their area. So my suspicion is if this works, and if we look at evidence from other areas of the country, including 500 schemes in London, there are a number of schemes in Kent as well, we know that these have proven really popular once they are instigated and a period of time is given for their people to get used to them. So I'm really excited. It's part of a wider programme of transport work we're doing with Arriva buses to improve those services for our residents, in addition to the Red Routes programme and moving vehicles at junctions as well. So hopefully with some of the positive proposals coming forward, this will work within that. And I wish to support again my colleague, Councillor Curry, who's been a real driving force behind this Safer Streets, School Streets initiative. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Lauren and then Teresa. Lauren, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to put on record my support for this scheme. I'm particularly pleased that St Peter's Infant School on Holcombe Road, which is in my ward, will be participating in it. I just wanted to really highlight the public health need for this action. There are two statistics in this paper that I think it's worth repeating. So in Medway, over the 3-year period up to the end of December 2022, there are 199 collisions, which involve 220 child casualties up to the age of 16. And when you look at the national picture, statistics from the Department of Transport reveal that 14% of children killed on Britain's roads in 2018 were between the morning school run, so between 7 and 9 a.m., and 23% after school, so between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. So this is a mechanism to improve safety outside of our schools across Medway. It's also going to bring a lot of benefits in terms of better air quality outside the schools and better health outcomes for our young people, who will hopefully be encouraged, particularly by their parents and by their schools, to cycle and walk to school rather than be driven. And I also, similarly to Tris, want to commend the council officers for what is a genuine informal consultation. I think a lot of times in government and in local government, people feel that consultation is a tick box exercise, and that certainly is not the case here. There are schools where they received very significant opposition, and we're not proceeding with those. We have listened. But that being said, I do hope that once, with the other 8 schools that are going forward, we have some really good data, which I think we will, showing that they have achieved the outcomes that we want, that they are probably going to prove quite popular in the long run, because that's certainly been the trend when we've looked at in London and other places across England where these have been implemented. There has been a bit of a rocky picture when it's first been introduced, but once it's in there, people say it's really, really valuable. So I'm expecting that to be a similar case here in Medway, and I hope once we have that data, we will go back to those schools who were very opposed and those parents who were very opposed and provide them with the data to show the benefit of it, because it's a really, really important initiative, and people shouldn't be frightened about change, particularly when it's going to deliver such positive outcomes. And I hope that we will make the case again to those who've been in opposition for this informal consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Teresa?
Yeah, thank you, Vince. And I just wanted to reiterate what Lauren and Tristan have said. In our ward, Rochester East and Warren Wood ward, we're really pleased to have one of the pilots. And look, there's been a bit of scaremongering associated with this, but it's an example of where we've got to start somewhere. If we're serious about tackling climate change, if we're serious about wanting children and families to be healthier, we've got to take steps that make that happen. And this does make that happen. It will improve air quality, and it will encourage people to walk safely. One of the reasons that lots of families don't want their children to walk to school is because they're worried that they're going to get run over by a car, or that something will happen to them. So this is a way of hopefully securing a bit of confidence. Look, as a parent and grandparent, I understand the pressures of getting a family to school. If you're working, and the fact that people have got to juggle all sorts of things, and sometimes, taking the car is the quickest way to do it. But if walking to school is safer, and everybody agrees it's healthier, I think people will be prepared to compromise a bit and think perhaps the children can be a little bit more independent, perhaps everybody feels a bit less likely that they're going to take the car. And for people who live in the school streets, I think they're going to be very happy, because one of our biggest post bags is about people being inconsiderate when they're dropping children off. And Lauren Edwards and I have done several early morning and pick up and school time drop off watches in places where residents have complained to us that they can't get out of their road or that there's inconsiderate parking, and we've worked with schools to encourage people to be more considerate. So we're formalising some of that work here, and I think, like Simon and Tristan think, that once people see this going, they will want it for their school, and I'm really pleased that there's already been some interest. And, you know, I would say to people, in Arethusa Road, a difficult road in our ward, we had a car overturn the other morning. It ended up on its roof, on the pavement, outside one of the schools. So, you know, if anyone wants any examples of the need to take action on this, there's one. And I think the people in that area will welcome this, and they'll be watching very carefully to see how it works out, and making demands on us to get some change in that area too.
Thank you, Teresa. Before I go back to Simon, I mean, I think what this paper shows is actually the benefit of informal consultation, and we can't do that with everything. Sometimes because of perhaps statutory guidance and national pressure from government, we may not be able to do that. But the fact we've listened really carefully, and actually others have wanted to be in the tent, and we're being able to facilitate that. And there's some real technical issues, and of course, you know, I recognise both Phoenix and Greenvale are in my ward, and I understand some of the concerns because some of those roads are pretty much next to each other. So there's some practical stuff. And again, as a listening collaborative council, we will do as much as we can, as often as we can. So thanks, colleagues. Simon, back to you.
No, thank you very much, Vincent. Just thank you, colleagues, for your comments and support for this, and particularly for Tris, for the work he's put into making this happen, and to the officers. I think one of the aspects here is also one of the questions I've had from several, and being involved with my own school in Luton Primary, in my own ward as well, is head teachers saying we're not here to monitor and manage traffic outside our school gates every morning. We've got enough on our plates already, and this is where the council can step in and help out with the head teachers and with the staff at the school to help the children get there safer. So there's a whole host of benefits that are coming out of this. We will be monitoring the air quality around the schools. That's part of the deal here. So there'll be nitrous oxide tubes put up to do that. And significant changes in levels of pollution, we know, lead to significant health improvements, particularly in children's lungs. And that leads to better education, better health, better lifestyles for them going forward forever, actually. Children who are unhealthy because of the air they're breathing usually end up with being unhealthy for the rest of their lives for one reason or another. And this is addressing that problem. And it's part of that wider picture that we have about the child-friendly Medway, the safer streets generally, and about climate change and the action that we're taking to improve our climate. So it isn't an isolated policy. It's not an isolated thing. It's a much wider picture involved here as well. So thank you, colleagues, and thank you to officers.
Recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. Item 9, Adam, over to you on the proposed changes to educational travel assistance policy. Over to you.
Thank you, Vince. Yes, this is quite an interesting paper for me, really, because over the years when I've been a councillor in opposition, there have been certain committees where I've been able to sit on and I've been able to make a difference to people's lives. And like one of those is the school transport committee, whereby a panel of councillors can listen to appeals from families who have been trying to get education, travel-like assistance for them. And that could be to do with special needs. It could be to do with the breakup of families where there's maybe one parent in charge of the household of children, having to try and get them to various multiple schools, etc. So what's been happening is that, and I am presenting this outcomes of the consultation on behalf of my fellow portfolio holder, Councillor Tracy Coombs, who is unable to make this meeting, but she's the portfolio holder for schools. We've just been hearing about the safer routes to schools, so this is another aspect of travel associated with schools, and particularly deals with special needs, but for the other reasons as to why there are families who might not be able to send their children to their nearest appropriate school, and therefore they would qualify for some support due to hardship, etc. And we do have a budget within the council. So basically, rather than just as I have done before on the school transport committee, just said, look, this is the policy that we have. This council has been working hard and has been going forward with consultation with the Parent and Carers Forum, but also with parents as well, around various proposals to actually amend or to make additions to the education travel assistance policy. So obviously the background is that all local authorities have a statutory duty to have in place arrangements for the provision of education travel assistance, as I've just said, for children and young people, including SEND. Basically there was a consultation which ran for 6 weeks in the spring of this year, and 6 individual proposals were presented. These were, first of all, option A, to develop and deliver an in-house travel training service in line with current policy. So that is where we're talking about helping families, but also younger children themselves, in the later ages of primary, but also the younger ages of secondary, to be able to work with them, to be able to support them, to be able to walk to school, or to be able to travel maybe in groups, etc., rather than just sticking to maybe the provision of taxis, etc. So that was one of the options, and there was, and I'll just run through briefly what the response was. So the second option was to include the option to provide a suitably trained and vetted independent travel companion to accompany a child on their journey to and from school, wherever it is evidence that a parent or carer is unable to do so due to disability. The third option, which was put out there, and I'm very pleased that this has been taken forward because we've been hearing about the cost of living, etc. But this option was to increase the fuel allowance from one return journey from home to school per school day, where an eligible pupil is in the vehicle, to 2 return journeys for both mainstream and SEND pupils. And then the option D there, the fourth option, which was put out there and we invited comments on, was to actually increase the fuel allowance rate, which hasn't been increased since 2018. Option E, that's the one option which officers are not recommending that we go ahead with at the moment. That is about specifying that SEN transport will only be provided at the start and end of the normal school day. So we know that there are circumstances whereby SEN children might be going on a part-time basis to school. So we need to be able to reflect that, but we do need to do some further work on actually taking that forward. The option F, which is the 6th option there, was to reframe available post-16 travel assistance arrangements in order to prioritise options which promote independent travel and public transport use and ensure more needs-targeted provision of hired transport. So what we're saying there is that we're trying to promote that. Obviously, that will be subject to the agreement of parents. We're not going to impose it on parents as such. So obviously, with that last option, we had more people who disagreed with it than they agreed for that very reason. But officers are proposing to go ahead with that option because it will be with the consent of parents and to work with those that want to actually take that forward, rather than just say, let's not do it because it's not popular, as it were. I, again, like another meeting that I was at today, so I was at the Youth Justice Board today, and then I left that early in order to go to the Medway Parents and Carers Forum. And under any other business, they were talking in a very excitable way about this recent consultation, because the Medway Carers and Parents Forum had themselves been able to put forward their comments on the proposals, but they, and I have to say I was concerned also, at the numbers of consultations. So when you look at it, when they're talking about maybe 1,600 people involved, there were only 13 formal responses, which begs the question as to how good our communication is in terms of being able to get these proposals out there, to invite comments to come back from parents and carers. So that's something that I will be looking into, because they were quite exercised by it, albeit that they were able to put forward their responses in a catch-all basis on behalf of other parents and carers. So the outcomes are that officers recommend options A to D based upon the positive response which came from respondents, and also option F, that one whereby we can work with the post-16 ones around independent travel, subject to the consent of the individuals and their parents, even though there was more opposition to that proposal. So officers take the concerns on board, and they'll ensure that option F will only be taken forward where there is full consent from the parent, and also where it's wholly not appropriate. It's not a blanket proposal, only for those pupils for whom it is a positive and achievable change. Option E, as I've indicated before, this is the thing about the SEN transport and like specifying that it can only be provided at the start and the end of the normal school day, whereby we know that there are needs for part-time school like attendance. So that's not going to be recommended at this time because there was strong opposition to the proposal, and officers believe that there's some merit in the proposal and understand their concerns and questions, and will explore alternative ways to address this, working with stakeholders. So basically, I'm recommending to Cabinet to consider those responses that we've had, options A, B, C, D, and F to proceed with. Under option D, there's a 12.5% increase in terms of the fuel allowance rate to 45p per mile, which will obviously dovetail with our support for the cost of living, etc. as well. So we're a joined up council here. I would like to move that, but subject to any questions or comments from my fellow members of this Cabinet as well.
Thank you very much, Adam, and detailed response. Very helpful indeed. Any comments from colleagues? I mean, I think the one thing I would say before we formally put that to the vote is quite often if there is an organisation involved, so in this case the Parents and Carers Forum, members of that might feel their voice has been heard through that. So we just need to understand when we've got, and that's not the only example, there'll be friends of groups, there'll be lots of different Medway groups who might respond to a consultation, and we just need to understand how that might impact on the numbers that we see coming forward. Teresa.
Yeah, thank you for that, Adam. And just to put on record, I attended the Medway Carers and Parents Forum with Adam this morning. And the comments that were made were very rational, actually, and based on experience. It was not the case that the forum didn't support the intentions to try to improve independence for this group of children. And, you know, I recognise that these children are part of child-friendly Medway. They need more support to take advantage of the freedoms and independence and opportunities than other people. And we have to be careful about the way we do that. And I think the Parents and Carers Forum, that's what they want for that group of children as well. So it was good to come along, and I'm also going to go back to the forum because I'm interested as well to make sure that those parents who have got children with particular needs and you know, whatever way you cut it, a bigger ask than parents whose children don't have those kinds of additional needs. Are we doing enough for those parents in their own right to make sure that they can lead happy and fulfilling lives? So, you know, are they getting a carer's assessment? Are we doing everything that we can for them in the same way that we do for people who are looking after carers with later life dependencies? And I think it was a very worthwhile and actually very succinct and well-managed meeting.
Thank you very much. If there's nobody else, Adam, back to you for any final comments. And we'll...
I recommend that we pursue with those options, subject to the option A being worked on further by officers. And thank you for your contributions on this important policy area.
Thank you, Adam. Is those recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. That moves us on to the next agenda item. Mashaba, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vince. So I'm bringing forward this agenda item on the Brook Theatre, which follows a structural survey which was conducted on the building that has found that it needs additional repairs in order to be reopened and to be able to be sustainable in the future. The paper sets out the options that the officers have set out following a review of what is required and what is needed, and the recommendation is for option 1, which would be for £14.7 million of work to be undertaken. Just to provide some context, this links in with the Future High Streets Fund and also the Levelling Up Fund, which we've received in relation to the Brook Theatre, and obviously it is part of the wider strategic redevelopment of Chatham Town Centre. So it is, while also a sort of iconic site within Medway, it is also part of our wider programme of regeneration across the towns. So the proposal is to take forward the 14.7 million to undertake the work, because the option of doing nothing would be to see the Brook Theatre closed, and that is not something that would be sustainable in terms of what we're looking to deliver, and would of course put this building at risk. There are two other options in terms of funding, but as you can see, in terms of what is required and the opportunity to get this right the first time round, option one sets out very clearly the full package of works that would be needed. And just to put some clarity, there has been a buffer placed into this that if there are any additional issues that should arise, then we will be able to address those through consultation heavily with myself, and in order to see if anything else, if there is any other additional work that is needed, we can sign that off. But this is to ensure that we can keep the Brook Theatre sustainable, functional and open, and continue to benefit from the Future High Street Fund, but also the Levelling Up Fund that we have been allocated.
Thank you very much, Nishaba. Any colleagues? Harinder, please.
Yes, thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Nishaba. And just to place on record, as looking forward towards our strategy in terms of our cultural offer, in terms of our theatre offer, this is something that we can't, this is not something we can not do. We have to go ahead and move on one of these options, and I support option one, and I support support everything that Nishab has just said, and so it's something that we're going to have to push forward with.
Thank you very much. Tristan?
Thank you very much, Vincent. I will support Councillor Khan's proposal. Chatham, you'll know this well, being a former employee, but it first opened in '97. We know that the period is full of, the building is full of period features and character. It was previously the former Chatham Town Hall building prior to the move, and which first opened back in 1900. So it has over the last 25 years played host to, many people will know this watching, Medway's thriving performing arts community, and it still has a place right at the heart of that, whilst establishing a reputation, somewhat deserved, for hosting some of the best comedians across the UK's stand-up comedy circuit, including Tom Allen and Sean Walsh, amongst others. So it is something which is notable in the community, and if it were to be lost, it would be something that would be noted. It would take the heart out of Chatham. And so fundamentally, we are left with that decision about whether we support our community and its history and our heritage in aspect, or we don't. And I think the difficult decision tonight has been the right one, because we know that there's longevity here. The Brook Theatre has proudly hosted over 5,000 performances in the last 20 years alone, so we know this is a popular and supported provision. And with the addition of improved access across the building for public performers and staff, new staging and lighting, better office and meeting spaces, improved dressing rooms, and new digital equipment to modernise to the needs of today's performing arts community, new toilets and refurbishment, we know that can only gain from strength to strength. So, and with the support of a multitude of different financial backers, including the government and Future High Streets Fund, amongst others, it's really important that we step up to the plate here and support the regeneration of that site, and it is ultimately in the centre of one of the key areas of regeneration in Chatham, to develop that thriving town centre near the Pentagon Centre and the Brook area as well. So this will all link together to form a real vibrant area and community centre for our cultural arts, and I'm looking forward to seeing its completion and visiting. Potentially to a stand-up comedy, but we'll see what they have to offer in its new iteration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tris. Teresa and then Lauren.
Yeah, thank you, Nishaba, and thank you, Harinder, for your support from the cultural side. And I think it's fair to say, as portfolio holders, you've both led us into this carefully, and I've had some assurances that the officers can manage the borrowing in an agile way that's going to be needed, in conjunction with the money that has come from the government. It was a shock when we first heard about the additional spend, but I think the Brook has got enough of a reputation to go from strength to strength. I think, people in this room, people who are watching, everyone in the towns will have fond memories of something that the Brook does very well, and that is giving people an experience in early life of theatre that gives inspiration to families to perhaps take things further, to get involved locally in theatre groups. And certainly when I've been there at events where we've had visiting artists, one of the things that was said very directly to me when I attended a music festival that was there prior to the lockdown was that people were a bit shocked about the terrible changing facilities and those kinds of things. So I think, you know, we're going to have a modern facility in a historic setting that will answer the needs of our growing cultural and creative community, and there'll be other potential to develop it in different ways. So, you know, I want to sort of reassure all of the taxpayers there that, having, you know, been a bit shocked at first, I feel reassured that this is something that we can manage, and we're doing that in the long-term interests of our towns and with respect to the heritage and fond memories that everybody's got about the Brook.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. I did just want to sort of highlight that it is regrettable that we're having to spend significant amounts of money so as not to lose central government funding. I do slightly question how much the previous administration knew about the risk when we approved the £250,000 for the surveys back in November. I support option 1 because, as the paper makes really clear, the savings for option 2 are quite minimal. It is a heritage building. It's key to our creative regeneration of Chatham and Medway, so I entirely support it. But I do want to just put on record, you know, we are going to have to make some difficult financial choices to accommodate the revenue pressure of this additional borrowing, even if it is agile. And, you know, we're obviously getting quite experienced at dealing with inheriting financial issues. And this will be another one that we will deal with, but fully support making this investment in the Brook Theatre. As I said, it's key to our creative regeneration plans. And, you know, please support option 1.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And before I go back to Nashaba to finalise this item, your points are absolutely right. Substitute a 125-year-old civic building with a 25-year-old swimming pool, and you've got the same problem that we've had over the last 2 years in rain and with splashes. So there is something around making sure we look after our assets. And I think this administration, with all the financial struggles we're going to have, and let's be clear, £750,000 extra pressure on the revenue account year on year for the next 40 years is a big pressure. But on balance, it's the right thing to do for all the reasons that people have laid out eloquently tonight. So I'll be supporting this. We need to make it work financially as much as practically possible. Theatres often are there for the wider cultural offer, so it may not just be about the pounds and pence, but the kind of wider positive impact on people's lives, increasing the number of jobs that could be coming from this, particularly depending on what the rest of the building, apart from the main theatre area, is used for. And that will be something we'll be looking at, of course, over the next 18 months. So I'll be supporting this. It is regrettable that once again, with this council, albeit we're in a different administration, we're picking up the pieces 48 days on, are now in a position that doing a £250,000 survey has led us to another £14 million bill. But with regret, it is the right thing to do. It will be financially challenging, but there is no other option, frankly. Nashaba, back to you, please.
Thank you, and thank you to colleagues for your comments. And in terms of what you've just said there, Vince, I would agree. I think there has been a clearly inheritance of some challenging situations that we have had to take on as a cabinet and take very quick decisions on and review very quickly. I think that it's as we've already mentioned, this will add additional financial pressures, and we are obviously seeing a number of issues that are coming forward that have a similar pressure for us as an authority, and it does, beg the question: why was some of this not reviewed sooner and earlier, and why was investment over time not happening when it was required, rather than having to then look at something and find large pots of money. However, that said, I would strongly recommend that cabinet members take forward option 1 because it is the right thing in terms of everything that we've discussed here today, the strategic regeneration of the Chatham Town Centre, but also our cultural offer in Medway and what that means for further investment and the longer term vision that we have for creating a healthy, vibrant and Medway where people can, you know, there is a strong offer on the table. So I would encourage Cabinet members to support the option 1 and have reflected and taken on board the comments that have been made with reference to the pressures that this will place on funding. But I would ask for the approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishab. Is that agreed, colleagues?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. That moves us on to the next item. Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Sadly, this is all about asset management again, failing vehicles and failing vehicle fleet. From people's homes. I'm breaking down. So, talking about asset management and the failings of not managing our assets properly over a period of time. I'm not just mentioning microphones here. This is what this item is about, sadly. It's about one of our core duties, to collect the waste from people's homes and make sure that it's disposed of sustainably. I mean, that's what this is all about. And we have a waste fleet that's currently costing us over £300,000 a year to maintain, because it's already past its sell-by date and the replacement should have been taking place years ago and wasn't. So we're now faced with a significant cost to start that process of vehicle replacement. But I would say that instead of just going ahead and replacing everything all at once, which would not be a sensible approach, this is a part of a wider waste management strategy which we are currently developing as part of our council's plan, if you like, to go forward and how we do things more sustainably. We want to be carbon zero, we want to be recycling as much as we possibly can. All those things are part of this waste management strategy. But unfortunately, right now, we need to replace these vehicles. So the idea is that we will gradually start a programme of replacement over the next few years. And to do that, we need to ring-fence the capital sum that's needed for that of £17 million. So that's sort of an indicative capital cost, if you like, over the coming years. It takes about 18 months to replace one vehicle. You place your order for it, and then you just have to wait for them to build it for you. We're going initially for Euro 6, which is the most up-to-date from an environmental point of view. Ideally, we want to be replacing with electric, and even better than that, with hydrogen-fueled vehicles, which are on their way. In some places, they're already appearing. So that's where we're going with this programme, this waste management strategy, and that's where we'll be in the next few years. So we're presented with 3 options within this report, and I just want to give my thanks to all my colleagues. We've had quite a vigorous discussion about how we go about doing this. And it was quite open and honest about how we should be doing this. I'm hoping this report now reflects our colleagues' views on what we're taking forward. And option 3 is about starting that replacement programme as soon as we can, but bearing in mind the flexibility of leasing and the flexibility of bringing more environmentally friendly vehicles in over the coming years is built into this option. So that's what I would be putting forward to colleagues. And I just want to thank the officers as well for the amount of work that's gone into making this happen, because it's not been an easy task, and it won't be easy going forward. To be honest, it's going to be hard work getting this completed. But as I say, it's a core responsibility of the council. I'll leave it open for comment.
Thank you very much. Simon, Teresa?
Yeah, thank you, Simon, and thank you as well, and to officers for taking into account what was a vigorous discussion before about how we had come to be in this position of having to consider more prudential borrowing. And I think one of the reasons is a failure to attend to the way that waste vehicles are developing over time, and a failure to understand that just because a fleet was in place, it didn't mean it had to stay there with nothing happening to it for years until it was ready to be replaced. The kind of flexibility that's now being built in, the option to replace the fleet incrementally and consider that we might have some leasing options in there if we want to look at new vehicles coming on stream. And I can see from research I've done myself that there's lots and lots of things out there that are starting to come forward. So I'm really glad that we've left space within the strategy to be able to take advantage of that. And I do regret the fact that there wasn't more work with Norse to ensure that the estate that they use wasn't developed to accommodate cleaner vehicles. I fail to understand completely why, over a long period of time, that wasn't something that was in the uppermost mind of people who claim to be attentive to the fact that we've got a climate emergency. You know, the idea that you just keep buying vehicles that, retrofitting is hugely expensive compared to giving yourself the flexibility to do some renewal as the technology changes. And as I said during our discussions, these are not the kind of vehicles that people want to buy and convert into a camper van when everyone's finished with them. I'm afraid it just isn't like that. And the way that the policy had not developed implied that, ownership was all. And at the end of a period of time, when we end up with waste vehicles we can't use anymore, somehow that was an asset to be proud of. That's not the case. So this gives, with your guidance, Simon, a more modern, flexible approach so we can take advantage of opportunities as they come forward and work with North to ensure that they are attentive to the way that they manage their estate and the future needs of the vehicles that we're going to use for collecting waste.
Thank you, Teresa. Lauren?
Thank you. I equally welcome the flexibility in the plans after our discussions. I have previously commented and would reiterate my comment that I think that replacing the entire fleet in one go, as has been done in the previous administration, is really poor risk management of obsolescence risk. I am still quite concerned that we are recommending investing in diesel vehicles only 6.5 years before it's not going to be legal to buy or sell them. And, would reiterate the comments that have already been given around, why weren't more environmentally friendly options looked into, and particularly appropriate depot locations for electric vehicles when this was reviewed in 2019 and 2022. I think we all know it's because the previous administration paid lip service to climate change, and actually, as we're finding out as a new administration, actually weren't particularly good at running things or getting good value for the taxpayer, quite frankly. There's some commentary in the paper around what will happen to the new fleet in terms of converting it to electric, hydrogen, or other low emission technology vehicles. But there isn't anything that I could see about that's for the new fleet. But what's going to happen with the old fleet? Just a question for you, Councillor Curry. Is it the same process will also apply to those, even though they're an earlier version of vehicles, or are they destined for the scrap heap, as it were?
Okay, thank you. Any other colleagues? If not, I'll go back to Simon.
Right, thank you very much. And just in response to your question, Lauren, it's, the fleet has really reached the end of its life now, so the scrap heap is where it's going to be going, unfortunately. Refurbishment is not, but it's costing us, and the estimate is about £30,000 a month for those vehicles that are the most need of repair, and that's just not sustainable going forward. So unfortunately, that's the situation we've been left, and we're trying to sort of resolve that if we can. So as far as the management, as I mentioned, there's a waste management strategy currently in process of being produced. Part of that strategy will be about depots, and those depots will have the capacity for recharging or capacity even for hydrogen storage so that hydrogen vehicles can be used. That's the future that we've got to do. And we can either choose to do it now or choose to do it in 5 years' time, but we're going to have to do it. So we may as well choose to do it now and go for it. The £17 million is a ring-fenced sum as part of that contingency going forward, so that we've got the capital available as part of the prudential borrowing. And as has been mentioned by other colleagues, there is flexibility around leasing. If we see that vehicles coming forward that we can afford to lease and that becomes a better financial option, we will take that financial option. And it may be that we need to come back to Cabinet on 1 or 2 occasions over the coming years in relation to that. So I would recommend at 11.1 in the recommendations that we go ahead with the procurement on option 3.
Thank you, Simon. Is that agreed, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you. That moves us on to the next agenda item, which is looking at the issue of Cabinet advisory groups. For me to move off on this. We inherited a long list of Cabinet advisory groups. There will be a shorter list at the end of this agenda item of Cabinet advisory groups, but that's not to say lots of important conversations won't continue to happen in a number of forums. So let me highlight what we will be bringing forward in our recommendations, primarily 4 things. We'll be bringing forward 2 working parties. That's on the climate change, similar to the one we had previously, but that won't be a cabinet advisory group, and that will involve members from all 3 political groups. And that will sit alongside, importantly, an enhanced engagement with the wider public of Medway. As we have often said, both in opposition and in administration, tackling the climate change isn't just the 10 of us, isn't just the 59 of us, actually. It's about 300,000 of us, plus the other 7 billion on the planet as well. But we'll play our part. So we've put those structures in place. We've also brought forward the local plan working group. That will involve councillors who are determined to deliver a local plan that is fit for purpose. I noted with interest the Leader of the Opposition's commitment in doing that in his interview recently with an excellent local award-nominated political blog. I welcome that comment, and I know he said that in the spirit it's meant, so I'm confident those 7 members that are listed on there, including 3 cabinet members and the chair of planning, will engage appropriately. I want people in that meeting who want to deliver a local plan. If you don't want to deliver a local plan, don't bother asking to be in that meeting. On the second part of that, the 2 cabinet advisory groups that we will be retaining, town centres, colleagues will know town centres were a key pledge of ours. And actually, we've taken a slightly different approach, both on the town centre forums, that work is ongoing, but importantly, the town centre board. So we've brought forward the fact of 1 member from each of the wards who directly represent the individual town centres. And I look forward to working with all of those colleagues. It's important to recognise the Town Centres Board looks at everything from the day-to-day practicality to the huge regeneration we've had, both particularly over recent years in Chatham and Rochester. And then, really importantly, and I'd say this anyway, but clearly we've got some visitors that we welcome to Medway. We look forward to hearing from them in due course over the next few weeks. But the Corporate Parenting Board is something which I take a very close personal interest in. I want to make sure it's amplified as much as possible. So I welcome the fact we've got, I think, the strongest team we've ever had on there, the 18 members and substitutes who are on there. They will do a really good piece of work. I'm confident of that. And that's why in the 3rd recommendation for a new addition, that Corporate Parenting Board will be submitting an annual report to full council to, again, make sure on the highest statute we have here in our council, that voice of the young people, those 450-odd young people, have got a direct ability to be influencing us as a collective council of 59. And I welcome that. And I know some of the briefings we've had, the training briefings since we've had the election, they've been really powerful and passionate. So it's about making sure that as we get back to business as usual, we make sure that that voice is heard at the heart of our decision making. So the 3 recommendations as laid out. Happy to take any comments from any colleagues. Lauren and then Simon. Lauren, please.
Thank you. I really welcome the retention of the Town Centre Board, and I think that having the council leader chair it really shows the significance of town centre regeneration to the new administration's plans. And I think it links very well with the improvements that I want to make as the portfolio holder to really drive up standards across our town centre forums. I want them to be really vibrant, inclusive, democratic places. And I want them to have a stronger voice in our regeneration plans as well. So I think that fits very well with the agenda you've outlined today. I just had a question about the status of the active travel subgroup. I know that Simon's been doing some work around that, which was obviously a subgroup of the climate change group, which is no longer being taken forward. I've obviously been a very strong advocate for breaking Medway's reliance on cars and having a real focus on active travel in terms of better cycling routes, walking routes, better public transport options. So I definitely want to make sure that we don't lose that focus, and would just ask for some commentary about how that work will be taken forward, particularly in our KPIs around how good it is to get around Medway, which until this administration have been very focused on average car journeys, but actually need to be about reliability of our bus services, the quality and the coverage of our cycling routes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simon.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you for your question. I'll pick that up in a moment. I mean, I just wanted to sort of mention firstly about our climate change working group, if you like, the approach behind that. Obviously, it was the Labour group that brought the climate change emergency motion to Council in 2019, and we've been campaigning strongly on it. We've had our climate conversations across Medway all through last year, picking up the voice of the Medway communities and what concerned them the most. And taking that initiative forward, what we're now trying to do is to say to the communities, actually, your voice still matters, we still want to hear. We're having a community-based working group going forward, and you're invited to come and be part of that. And that'll start probably about October time. We'll be the first of those as we set up the process to get that in place and make sure that as many people in Medway not only have a voice, but also hear what's got to be done. It's very easy to say, let's get climate change done, but your average householder has to say, well, how can I do that from one day to the next in my community when I've got such a busy thing and the children have got to get to school and I've got to get to work, or my parents aren't well, or all those things that we have in our lives. How do I do climate change in the middle of all that? And this is where this message comes through. We will communicate as much as we can into the community about ways each of us can take on a little bit of responsibility to make the climate in Medway a better place, and that adds to the contribution to the global picture that Vince mentioned as well. So that's what that group's all about. The members, the cross-party members working group will also be looking at that, but also looking at the council's responsibilities, if you like. And I welcome the fact that the opposition have put their members forward for that, and it's really good to hear that they're going to be part of that process. And we're looking at what are the council's responsibilities internally and how we operate and how we do things, everything from running our waste fleet to the bus service. And that takes me on to the active travel. As part of that, bringing the message of climate change to the heart of everything we do, active travel is fundamentally part of that. We need to understand that, like I've said before, we either do it now or wait 5 years, but we're still going to have to do it. Public transport is the future for travel in our towns and our cities across the country. We are behind a lot of other cities across the country in terms of how well we do public transport. We need to be better at that. Active travel is where it comes in, so that people have that choice of a bus or a tram even. One day, I dream of trams again in Medway, which were here over 100 years ago. That would be nice. And cycling and walking, the 20-minute community or the 15-minute community, as we're calling it now. That's the kind of future for active travel in Medway, and that's part of that contribution. We've already mentioned school streets earlier and how important it is for children to walk to school and the air improvements that brings about. It's just important for us adults as well. So that's where we're going with the active travel. It's part and parcel. It's that central message of what we're trying to do. So hopefully that's it.
Thank you very much, Simon. And I would agree. And I think actually it's around one of the things we're doing here with that critical issue is making sure we're not just hearing the voices of councillors, although they're important. It's about hearing the voices of those who will be out in our community, and actually some of those who will advocate strongly for it. So friends of groups, the eco hubs and others, they've got to be part of the solution. So having them very much in that conversation is critical. On that basis, happy to move those recommendations. Are those agreed? Thank you. That moves us on to the next item, which is on the local authority companies. I'll be moving the recommendations as laid out in paragraph 1. And just to give a clear indication, this is something we have taken a strong view of in opposition, but it's not just us, it's people like SITFA and others, you know, those professional bodies who are saying the best practice is to be in a situation where we have that shareholder board approach. The situation that we've had in previous administration I think has been questionable. That's not about individuals, although it is worth saying, as I mentioned at the last cabinet meeting, there is still an ongoing police investigation about one of those LATCOs and some previous activity there. But it is about recognising the practicality of this. And although we have effectively 3 LATCOs, 2 of those are solely owned by us. So that's pretty straightforward, and the recommendations are laid out there. And also, importantly, the lead member for each of the 3 LATCOs as laid out in paragraph 4.5. However, Medway North is a little more complicated because of the ownership. It's a joint venture. It still has a board members who are not from Medway. So we've got the interim position that we've got laid out in the paragraph 4.8, which will continue to have Ruth DeLu on there whilst we explore with Medway North. They're very clear of why we're doing this. This is not about them as an individual organisation. This is about our principled position on this, and they understand that. And we've been clear actually with all 3 organisations. This will mean a change in relationship. So that's why the recommendations are laid out as they are. The work will continue on that basis, and I'm grateful in particular to the Chief Legal Officer for his work on this to make sure that what we're bringing forward is legally compliant. This is changing where we have been as a council. I know some people disagree with that, and that's fine. We disagreed how it was done previously. Any questions or comments on the paper before we move to the recommendations? Teresa.
Just a quick comment, really. I really welcome regularising our role in the LATCOs and lining us up as far as we can do with national guidance and best practice. I think that's really important. And I'm looking forward to a changed relationship on my part that's already started with Kindy. I've met with the new chief executive. I've encouraged senior officers in fact, to join me at that meeting, whereas hitherto they had had no involvement, so that Kindy, I felt, didn't and the last cabinet meeting I expressed my disappointment in the report that came forward, and I think that was, the report was disappointing, very simplistic, very low level, because there hadn't been that involvement with people who can really drive home what the council's objectives are and how, after all, the point of having a LATCO is to make things better, not worse. So there's going to be a much more active involvement, that there'll be cross-organisation workings at board level, and a more open expectation about what we want Kindy to provide for us. They've got a role to play in the whole assistive technology agenda, and I'm looking forward to a refreshed approach in a more secure way that means that people are not going to kind of fall into a situation where their behaviour is irregular or they don't really know where we stand as a council against the LATCO.
Thank you. Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. Just picking up Teresa's point, really, but then in relation to Medway North and how they deliver the services that we require of them and that we're paying for. Obviously, Vince has mentioned it's a more complex relationship that we have with them, which we're going to try and sort of simplify and make a much more clearer, more transparent approach to what they do for us as a company. We're very happy with a lot of the services that are provided. Others are much more, as issues around them, how well they're doing and stuff like that. So the purpose of the exercise here is really to make it, to hold them to account more for what they're delivering and get the value for money. Those are sort of requirements that are on us as a local authority. The value for money for our taxpayers and for our communities, holding these companies to account in making sure that they're doing the work they should be doing and to a standard that we expect of them. So I think that's really what we're about in terms of how we're making these changes in relation to Medway North. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nishaba.
Thank you. And to reflect what other colleagues have said, I really welcome this report. I think it is a really strong step towards good governance, which is what we need for all 3 of these companies. From an MDC perspective, I believe that this will give us that, again, as others have talked about, Kindy and others, and Norse, that this will give us an opportunity to provide that strategic oversight and to ensure that we are delivering in line with what our priorities are for Medway, but without having to have that crossover in roles, which I think creates confusion and can at times also create a conflict of interest. So I welcome this. I don't think it takes away our ability to influence or takes away our ability to sort of drive forward the change that we want these companies to be able to deliver and the purposes as to why they exist. But I do think it gives us a strong step towards good governance, which I think as a council we should be advocating.
Thank you. Tristan.
Thank you very much, Vince. And I also support the conclusions of this report. Indeed, in opposition on Audit Committee, it was regularly reported via our auditors and also SIPFA that the recommendations were that we do not have executive members sitting in two hats and two capacities. And we've seen, I had hoped actually that had been learnt with the situation with a previous Kindy iteration, that actually that should have been a lesson learned. And I'm afraid it wasn't learnt. And not only that, we had a sort of pitiful defence of the previous model, and I'm afraid this has been is delayed and late, but it is actually very welcome. We need to have oversight that is appropriate in governance terms, but also in probity terms, given the history with LATCOs in Medway. I think this model is a very balanced view, and it allows stakeholders to engage with service holders. But it's important to note that officers now should have a stronger relationship actually with some of these LATCOs. It is noted that actually because of the formalised sort of approach previously, sometimes officers didn't have any relationships with Kindy in some cases, or other LATCOs, because there was a perception that that was a function for someone else at a higher level. Whereas I think with the stakeholder model, it allows officers, councillors and others to engage in a much more collaborative approach and in an open and transparent way, so that any conflicts of interest can be appropriately reviewed. And I think this is just, again, this is recommended for all local government, and most councils have made this move already. So we are late behind the curve. The rationale why we didn't move is completely illogical. It was based on what I considered to be individual motivations as opposed to a collective awareness of what was happening around the country. To ignore the auditor's recommendations, I thought was poor, and I think that we are now making a step in the right direction. And I really hope that we now can find the issues with Kindy's predecessor to the past. I'm hopeful that that investigation will conclude, and we can move forward in a positive light, where we can actually work in partnership with LATCOs to deliver the best services for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tris. I think I welcome all of those comments, and of course, 3 of the 4 of you will be those key portfolio holders who have that link relationship. So, yeah, SIPFA are there for a reason. Our auditors are there for a reason. We should listen to them, frankly. That's what we pay to do. So from that perspective, I'm really pleased with taking this step. It sends a clear message that we take governance seriously, and on that basis, I move the recommendations. Are those agreed? Thank you. Let's move on then. We've got some procurement, gateway 1 and 3. We'll start with Teresa. Over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Vince. This is about the school nursing and health visitors service. I remind members that those services are universal. In other words, they are open to all families. And we've got very good engagement, actually, with the health visiting service at the particular points on the child development curve of 90%. So this is a good service. We have discussed this before, and Cabinet already approved the decision to go out to tender on the 0 to 19 public health nursing services. It was presented by Tracy Coombs the first time around, but because it's procured by public health with public health funding, it actually comes under my portfolio. We had an original request to use a competitive dialogue process for procurement, but the timelines and the complexity of the procurement indicate that it isn't necessary to do that. So I'm asking you to agree we use an open procedure procurement, and giving you some assurance that the timelines that were set out in the original report won't be affected. So because we've already discussed it, I just want to remind people it's a universal important service that is about the health of children and families. It helps other people across the health and education community pick up problems and make referrals where appropriate. And it's just that slight technical change to the type of procurement compared to the paper that we had before.
Thank you, Teresa. Any comments on that? Pretty straightforward as we debated it last time. Okay, people happy with the recommendations? Agreed, thank you. Teresa, next one is yours as well.
The next one is a bigger call. This is about the home care service. I want members to be mindful, please, that these are the services that we procure to look after people in their own homes. and that's a large amount of our population. It's a very important service. We've got 9 companies and 23 others currently who do what's called spot services. In other words, they fill in where the 9 companies that are mainly procured are not able to fulfill their contract. I've had a good look at this with the procurement team. I'm pleased to be able to reassure you that the companies that we work with have a regular meeting with council officers every month. We provide them with training. We help to improve their resilience. We want them to have interconnection with the voluntary sector so that they can signpost the people that they're looking after to other services in the community that can help to advance their independence. And where there are problems, as there sometimes are, we take a partnership, sympathetic view to that. And it's true to say today that of the 9 providers, 3 are good and 6 requires improvement. And for the ones that requires improvement, there's lots of work going on from the council's point of view to uplift them. Now, in the national context, there are 165,000 vacancies in care. And one of the reasons for those vacancies locally is that we are the 3rd lowest payer to the agencies that we procure in the country. And Kent is the 3rd highest payer. So that creates a huge attrition of workforce from Medway into Kent locally and to the population more widely. And again, I'm afraid this is another area where we've got to take some bold steps to invest in this service and secure ourselves in a market where we're not prey to losing staff or being forced to employ more and more spot agencies every time there's a gap. So as part of that wider work I was referring to before, when I was talking about the Better Care Fund, there is work to do here in terms of investment, both in the workforce and in some of the facilities that are used, like extra care facilities, for example, to make sure that we position ourselves to be an employer of choice and that we work really hard to recruit and retain staff and make them believe that they've got a future. You know, if you know publicly, because again, the calculations have been done and they're on the public record, that you are working in a situation where it's the 3rd lowest payer in the country, that isn't motivating. And I think, you know, there's a huge thank you from me and everybody else who works in the domiciliary care area to say that the workers stick with us and that we haven't actually been in a position where we can't provide home care packages. There might be a waiting list for people waiting for assessments into home care packages, but once people are assessed, and we've got a good triage service to prioritise people's assessment, once people are assessed, they do get a package that works for them. So some of the things that you've heard me talk about tonight, can you see how they all dovetail? Assistive technology is going to help us manage the workforce effectively as well as being able to prevent things from happening. A better approach to securing our own facilities is going to help us become an employer of choice. And a realistic appraisal of where we are down at the bottom in terms of paying people and the organisations that they work for, looking after the most vulnerable people in our community, much less than other people, is a really bad position to be in. I'm ashamed to be in that position, actually, because I know what it's like from direct experience in my family to be a care worker, to rely on those care workers. And remember, these are the people who every single day throughout the pandemic went out and did their work at their own risk, very often without appropriate PPE, without hardly any help until quite late in the day with their travel. Eventually, the carers got a free pass, but it took much longer than it took to give NHS workers a free bus pass, and that's been withdrawn. So, you know, there's work for us to do nationally, and in the future, when there's a change of government, and I hope that government will be a Labour government, I will be the first one at the door putting pressure on the Labour government to do something for this group of staff and to make changes. So while I'm waiting for that glorious day, we're going to do as much as we can locally and we're going to take cognizance in this item of the position that we're actually in, so that when we come to the procurement, we are very frank and clear that we're trying to improve the situation at the same time as helping the people who are working with us now continue to provide a really good service.
Thank you very much indeed, Teresa. Any questions, comments on that before we move to the vote? Critically important, and recognising the challenging circumstances we find ourselves in as an authority. And I think you're right to say whoever is the government after the next election, and I know who I want it to be, but whoever it is, this administration will be calling on them to make sure that there is a long-term solution to the issue of care. On that basis, colleagues happy to support the recommendations? Great, thank you. I remind colleagues, obviously there are blue papers, although they're not blue on the screen anymore. If we can avoid going into those for the final 3 items, that would be great. I want to keep everybody in the room who wants to stay in the room. Adam, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Vince, and thank you, like Teresa, for leading me into this one, which is another Gateway 3 contract award. This time it's to do with children's care, and it's Medway Alternative Provision for Education. Obviously, there can be reasons at various times in a child's school life, whether it's through illness or through exclusion for a while, that they aren't able to go to their normal school. But nonetheless, there is an obligation, and we need to be able to support those children to be able to continue to receive education. This one here is about the proposed contract, which is actually being recommended to go to the existing light provider. They've actually looked at the various options there. The light. And I may have confused that with the next one if I did, so sorry about that. No, this one is about the alternative light provision. The actual Light Department of Education has issued policy guidance setting out the vision for alternative provision. And that's basically that the right children are placed in alternative provision in the first place. Every child receives a good education. Every child can make a successful transition out of alternative provision. And there was... the DfE also consulted on proposals for a national integrated special educational needs and disabilities SEND and alternative provision system. Basically, these like proposals, I'll just take you because it's quite a complex thing, and I want to avoid going into the exempt items there. But the actual like proposal is as like set out. They've gone through the various like evaluation criteria, and I'd like to so move the recommendation that the officers have actually come up with for being able to continue with alternative provisions. So there's an element of urgency here.
Thank you very much, Adam. Any colleagues wish to comment on that? I mean, I think it's worth just pointing out, obviously, recommendation 6.2. Yeah. We're recommending not to award contracts and move into the regulated, negotiated procedure, which we're allowed to do under the relevant legislation laid out in 6.2. So just to be clear on that. So on that basis, people happy to recommend and support the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Adam, next one for you as well.
And the next one is another Gateway 3 contract award. This time it's for SEND transport services. We all know that local authorities have another statutory duty, and the clue is in my title as portfolio holder, which is the children's services, in brackets, including statutory responsibilities. So in this case, the officers have been looking at the current light provider that actually transports approximately 400 children and young people to and from 7 schools and college sites each day. This is the one where the preferred option is to go to the current light provider, but they did look at the other options, which is to award to a framework light provider, and also the other option there that other framework providers could deliver the same service but at a higher cost. So there is the need to be able to continue this service certainly for the next 12 months in order to be able to get back into that procurement cycle. So I'd like to move the officer recommendations.
Thank you very much. Any comments from colleagues? Recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And then the final item tonight. Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vince. And this is again another Procurement 3, a Gateway 3 contract award in relation to supported bus contracts. And a bit like deja vu all over again, but we are in a bit of a crisis here. The current contracts terminate at the end of August, so the subsidised buses will have to be running by September, so this contract needs to get through as a matter of urgency. It is funded for this year with a grant support as well from government. So from that point of view, but that grant only lasts for a year, so we'll probably be back again here in a year's time looking at this, or even sooner if we can, looking at it. There are a number of issues around the bus services that we have, which were discussed in quite a lot of detail amongst members when we previously met. All I can say is, back, sort of reiterating what was said then, is that this is something that's part of the active travel programme. You've heard me what I've been saying about how important it is to us to get public transport front and centre. It is the future for Medway as a sustainable town, for our climate change, but also for our economic benefit. I mean, if we can get the congestion off the roads and get the air improved and all the other aspects of a really good quality public transport network, then we will have a better economy as well. So there's a whole load of issues around this that we're having to address, but we are starting from a low base, I'll be honest with you there. As we've heard from members, there is issues around the buses not being reliable, there's issues around the quality of the buses themselves, and there's issues around the pollution that they generate and all sorts of other... So we are looking at it from quite a low base. We're going to rebuild from scratch, really. I'll just draw attention to paragraphs 2.32 and 2.33 about the dialogue that's going on, about the monitoring that's going to be happening of the services, and making sure that they are, the companies that we've contracted are going to run to time, and if they're not, then we'll hold them to account on that. So there is issues coming in there. There's a 90-day termination clause that's built in there now. So we've got aspects where we can hold these companies to account. And I think that's the stick approach. And there's also the carrot approach. We're making it very clear that public transport is our future. If they want to be a part of that and benefit economically and for their own businesses, I'm sure they will want to engage with us and come along. And if they don't, then we'll find somebody else. And I think that's the carrot approach. This is the future, not just for Medway, but for these companies as well. So that's the approach we're taking. But as I say, at the moment, it is a matter of urgency that we get this through, but we're working on it as well. So that's pretty...
Thank you very much. Any colleagues? Teresa?
Thank you, Simon, and I know you've done a huge amount thank you, Simon. I know you've done a huge amount of work on this. Okay, now it is. Thank you. Thank you, Simon. I know you've done a huge amount of work on this and been very forthright and robust with the bus operators that we've got, and you're doing that on behalf of every bus user in Medway who stands at the bus station watching the app saying that the bus is going to come along in 3 minutes, and 25 minutes later it still hasn't arrived. And I do think that all of the operators in Medway absolutely should be engaging more with their passengers, not just when people complain, but also to hear passengers' ideas and needs about the route. And in Rochester, Western Borstal particularly, I pay tribute to Councillor Alex Patterson before the election and the work that he did on getting a bus reinstated for an evening service for that particular community that was just taken away without any notice. That keeps happening. Routes keep getting taken off. The timetable keeps changing with hardly any notice. The bus companies have definitely got to do better. So I'm glad that we've got a 90-day termination clause in there, because we do need a bit of stick to go along with the carrots. But, you know, the future's bright. There are other areas of the country with a better, more sustainable bus service than we've got, and people in Medway deserve to have one in exactly the same way as anybody else. And if we're serious about climate change, there's no choice about this. We need to have people working with us who are serious about climate change as well. And I don't want to find us in a situation, as we've heard from some parts of London, where a child dies of fumes from old buses belching out diesel. And I think we need better behaviour as well. It's too much idling of school buses, especially when they're outside someone's house waiting for school pickups. There's attitudinal and cultural changes, I think, among the staff that definitely need to happen. And I'm sure that we'll be working with unions and with managers to share our expectations about what we want the bus service to look like. I want a bus service that I can use reliably and that will support our nighttime economy so that people think that they can go and enjoy something in the town centre or at one of the cinemas and get home safely and in a timely way. We're not in that place now. But I know, Simon, that you're very serious about making sure that we will be. And I think some of these changes are a first step towards making that happen.
Any other colleague on that? Before I go back to Simon, look, this is worth saying publicly. The majority of buses that people see in Medway are not on this list. They are operated on a commercial basis, but that doesn't stop us as the local authorities administration saying Medway deserves better. You know, the example Teresa raised there, you could see that day in, day out at the dynamic bus facility down the road, or anywhere else, frankly, waiting on Fort Elms Hill for 2.5 hours for a bus. You know, examples like that are simply not good enough. And of course, we know the bus stop on Fort Elms Hill, there's going to be no improvements because the government's taken away £170 million. So, Simon, I'm really pleased that you, along with other colleagues in this room, because it does, although transport sits with you, actually it affects every one of us as cabinet members. You know, we want people to be able to get to their home safely, to get to the town centre safely, to enjoy our leisure facilities safely, to get to school safely. Public transport's a key part of that. So yes, we will let these contracts tonight, I'm sure. We will come to that in a moment. But actually, all of our operators, and that's whether they operate 3% or indeed 93% of our buses, must do better. Simon, back to you.
Thank you, Vincent. Just sort of to reiterate the point, I mean, I think members might remember that the previous leader of the council said in a full council meeting that he was not going to give up his diesel vehicle anytime soon. And that was kind of the attitude that we had to put up with back then in relation to public transport services in Medway. That has now changed. Changed fundamentally, and I really want to appreciate the work that the officers are now putting in to make those changes come about. It's really a lot of hard work is going in, and they're very keen to see it happen. So really appreciate what they're doing as well. And so hopefully the future is bright, and it will involve Arriva, but Arriva will want to be part of it because it is going to be a good future for us all. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are those recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Again, thanks to officers for facilitating tonight. And thanks for those who have joined us online and in person. Have a good rest of your evening.